This presentation is on Chapter 4 from the book Visible Learning for Teachers, Maximizing Impact on Learning, written by Hattie. Chapter 4 is entitled Preparing the Lesson. Classmates doing this presentation are Jessie Johnson, Chanel Walker, Sarah Bruce, and Alicia Wallace. Part 1 of this presentation will be presented by Jessie Johnson. Let's get started. Chapter 4 is all about preparing the lesson. When planning a lesson, there are 4 critical parts that must be considered right away. The first is prior achievement, which involves the levels of performance of the students at the start of a series of lessons. The second is targeted learning, which is the levels of learning that is desired by the end of a series of lessons. The third is progression, which is the rate of progress from the beginning to the end of the lesson series. Finally, teacher collaboration and critique in planning is the last critical part to be considered. The most powerful type of planning is the planning done when teachers work together to develop plans and evaluate how their planning is impacting student outcomes. All 4 of these critical parts of planning a lesson will be discussed in detail in this chapter. What a student brings to the classroom each year is very much related to their achievement in years past. Brighter students usually achieve more, while not so bright students usually achieve less. The job of the teacher is to mess up this pattern. They should plan ways to accelerate the growth of those who started behind so that they can attain achievement goals right alongside the brighter students. Before a lesson is planned, the teacher must know what students know and what they are able to do in order to tailor the lesson to help them. It is also crucial for a teacher to have a clear understanding of the student's present knowledge and position, as well as the desired or targeted position. A teacher's primary concern should be to add value to all students, no matter where they are starting from, and to get all students to achieve the targeted outcomes. One of the important things that teachers need to know about each of their students is how each one thinks. This does not mean that they need to know what their learning styles are, as there is no supporting evidence for its effectiveness. This means that teachers should try to understand a student's strategies for thinking so that they can help them advance their thinking. One of the most popular theories of thinking, as well as one of the most powerful, is Piaget's theory of learning. He argued that children develop their thinking through a succession of stages. The first stage is the sensory motor stage. This stage occurs between birth and 2 years old. During this stage, children are learning the relationship between their bodies and the environment, as they rely on their senses. They also learn object permanence in this stage, which is the idea that an object exists independent of them, even if the object cannot be seen. The second stage is the pre-operational stage. This stage occurs between 2 and 7 years old. During this stage, the child believes that everyone thinks the same way that they do, and they have a hard time seeing life from any other perspective but their own. They learn to form concepts and use symbols, bringing on the acquisition of language skills. It is hard for them to think in abstract terms, as their thinking at this stage is concrete and irreversible. The third stage is the concrete operational stage. This stage occurs between 7 and 12 years old. During this stage, logical thinking emerges, and children begin to explore concepts. The final stage is the formal operational stage, which occurs from 12 years old on into adulthood. During this stage, children begin to think in abstract terms, can form hypotheses, and can reason through analogies and metaphors. Of course, there have been some criticisms of Piaget's theory. The biggest criticism is the idea that each stage is tied to a certain age. It is argued that students can be in multiple stages, which Piaget also argued, that stages aren't necessarily tied to certain ages, while Piaget suggested that the ages he set were only guides, and that there is no strict sequence. The key issue here is that children think differently than adults and teachers, and more attention needs to be paid to how children are learning, not just to what they are learning. Scheer created a program of cognitive acceleration based on Piaget's theory. The program is based on 3 main drivers. The first is that the mind develops in response to a challenge, so any intervention must provide some cognitive conflict. The second is that the mind grows as we learn to become conscious of, and in turn take control of, its own processes. The third is that cognitive development is a social process promoted to high-quality dialogue among peers and supported by teachers. After coming up with the program of cognitive acceleration, Scheyer suggested two principles for teachers. The first principle is that teachers must attend first to how students think. Teachers must look at their role as one that creates interventions to increase the amount of children reaching higher thinking levels. They help the students reach higher thinking levels so that they can use and practice these thinking skills during a typical lesson. The second principle is that teachers need to listen as well as talk. Because learning is collaborative and requires dialogue, teachers are required to be attentive to all aspects of peer-to-peer construction and mediation. This allows them to be more aware of processing levels because they can see how each student responds to different activities, indicating the level that they are processing at. Scheyer pointed out a disturbing trend. The average age at which students are moving into Piaget's formal operational stage in the UK is increasing. Also, the levels of processing of the average 11 and 12-year-old about to enter high school spans about 12 developmental years, from the ages of 6 to 18. Further, fewer than 50% of 11th and 12th grade students are formal operational thinkers. What is leading to this trend? Scheyer suggests that one of the reasons may be the amount of attention paid to tests that measure the accumulation of knowledge, which could be detrimental to the development of higher levels of thinking. The message of all of this information is that we must know what students already know, how they think, and then aim to then progress all students toward the success criteria of the lesson. Along with prior achievement, students bring their own dispositions to a classroom. Hattie proposed a model that brought the research about the structures and processes of self-concept together. This model is called the rope model of self-concept. This model uses the rope as a metaphor to emphasize that there is no single strand underlying our self-concept, but that there are many overlapping concepts of self. The strength of the rope lies in the overlapping of the many fibers making up our self-concept. The model claims that students are choosers and that they aim to have some sense of order and predictability in their lives. The choices that students make aim to protect, present, preserve, and promise the sense of self so that they can back themselves or maintain a sense of self-esteem. Now we will look at some of the self-processes to which teachers should pay attention to, and if necessary, modify. These include self-efficacy, self-handicapping, self-motivation, self-goals, self-dependence, self-discounting and distortion, self-perfectionism, hopelessness, and social comparison. We will look at each of these in a little more detail. Each self-process will be accompanied by a replica of a chart or table that is available in Chapter 4. Self-efficacy is the confidence or strength of belief that we have in ourselves that we can make our learning happen. Students with high self-efficacy are more likely to see hard tasks as challenges instead of trying to avoid them. When they fail, they see it as a chance to learn and make a greater effort to look for new information the next time. Those with low self-efficacy are more likely to avoid difficult tasks, as they see them as a threat to themselves personally. They are likely to have low or weak commitment goals. When they fail, they are more likely to dwell on personal deficiencies, obstacles encountered, or to deny personal agency. They are also slow to recover their confidence. Self-handicapping occurs when students choose impediments or obstacles to performance that allow them to deflect the cause of failure away from their own competence and toward their acquired impediments. Examples of self-handicapping are procrastination, choosing performance-debilitating circumstances such as, "My sister ripped up my assignment this morning," engaging in little or no practice for upcoming tasks, having goals that aren't very challenging, exaggerating obstacles to success, and strategically reducing their effort. Basically, if the student fails, they have an immediate excuse to fall back on. We can reduce self-handicapping by providing more success in learning, reducing the uncertainty about learning outcomes, and teaching students to become better monitors of their own learning. Self-motivation can be toward intrinsic or extrinsic attributions. Is learning itself the source of satisfaction, or are the perceived rewards the source of satisfaction? Intrinsic motivation usually shows a greater investment in learning, which will lead to greater learning gains. Extrinsic motivation usually shows a greater shallow learning of surface features, completion of a task regardless of the standard, and the completion of a task just to get praise or similar rewards. A combination of both is needed, but it is better if the balance moves more toward intrinsic motivation. There is a lot of literature on the goals that students can have. There are three major types of goals: master goals, performance goals, and social goals. Master goals arise when students aim to develop competences. They consider ability to be something that, through increasing effort, can be developed. Performance goals arise when students aim to demonstrate their abilities, particularly by outdoing their peers. They consider ability to be something that is fixed rather than something that is moldable or able to be changed. Social goals arise when students are concerned most about how they interact with and relate to others in their class. These goals can be either approach or avoidance goals. Approach goals refer to when a student is striving to learn or master the lesson in tension. Avoidance goals refer to when a student is striving not to do worse than before or than others. There is a stronger relationship between achievement and approach goals rather than achievement and avoidance goals. Self-dependence occurs when students become dependent on adult directives. This can especially be seen in gifted classes where students aim to do everything that the teacher asks. Eventually, it gets to the point where they do not learn how to self-regulate, self-monitor, and self-evaluate. While they may gain esteem and success by attending to directives, their long-term success isn't assured when these directives are not present. When they are expected to regulate their own learning, especially in a college or university setting, they start to fail because of their self-dependent strategies that they've picked up. Self-discounting and distortion occurs when students dismiss information like praise, punishment, or feedback as not valuable, accurate, or worthwhile. An example would be a student discounting a teacher telling them that they've done a great job. They tell themselves that the teacher always says that, or the teacher is only trying to make me feel good, or that the teacher only said that because the work is neat, not because it's correct. Self-perfectionism comes in many forms. We set standards for ourselves that are so demanding that, when we do not meet them, we see it as failure. We can demand that the resources be perfect and blame the absence of resources when we do not succeed. We can procrastinate because conditions are not perfect for our success. We can attend to irrelevant details and overzealously invest time in tasks that may not be worth that increased investment. We demand an all-or-nothing approach, believing the task to be not at all or very much worth completing. There can be a sense of pleasure and pride that comes from taking painstaking effort. However, there are usually negative side effects. Hopelessness refers to when students expect that achievement gains won't occur for themselves and that they are helpless to change the situation. Students usually avoid and don't engage in achievement tasks and protect their sense of self by gaining success in other activities, such as with bad behavior. They don't understand that their achievement gains are due to their actions and that they are in control of them. Feelings of hopelessness probably come from prior academic failures. Social comparison happens often in classrooms. Students monitor the behavior of others for cues and attributions to explain or enhance their own conception of themselves. For example, students who are successful in math in an average class probably have a high math self-concept, but if they are put in a gifted math class, their self-concept may fall once they compare themselves to their new cohort. Marshall and colleagues termed this concept the big pond, little fish effect. It is important to teach students that they can have multiple sources of comparison so that negative effects can be reduced. Public boasting is another form of social comparison, where students compare themselves with those who are less fortunate than themselves in order to present themselves as more competent to impress others and even to impress themselves. This can create an impression of competence and engender dislike of the students among their peers, especially if peers become aware that the student's actual performance is poor. Students are much more likely to realize achievement gains and invest in learning when they are exposed to certain things, such as accepting feedback, comparing personal achievements to subject criteria instead of to other students, developing high efficacy to learning, and affecting self-regulation and personal control. These dispositions can be taught and learned. The more transparent the teacher makes the learning goals, the more likely the student is to engage in the work needed to attain the goal. If a teacher isn't clear with their learning intentions, then often the only goal for a student is to compare themselves to other students. Schunk said that when goals are made transparent at the start of a lesson, students have a higher confidence that they can attain them. Here is my reference for the textbook that the chapter was in. Thank you for listening.